Well, if you have a subscription to the journal, get a second subscription to the journal. Look, there are a lot of sources, and it's just important to read widely. I wish I could say just read, I don't know, Martin Gilbert's books on Israel, or Michael Oren's 6 Days of War, or Abe Rabinovich's book on the Yom Kippur War. Joan Peters wrote this book from time immemorial about the origins of the 48 War. All those are terrific books. It's worthwhile going, as I do on a regular basis, to the MEMRI website, memri.org, which is basically a translation service of what is in the Arab or Muslim world's media, which is fascinating. Really, really interesting to see what the conversation they're having in Arabic or Urdu or Farsi. I find the Israeli media pretty unreliable because there's I don't know, I read stuff in the Israeli media and I think, well, that might be true. But there's a lot of mediocrity in Israeli journalism as well. So I have to take that with a grain of salt. I mean, most of what I do and learn I get in a way that it's probably not available to you, which is from primary sources. And I just talk to a lot of people. We get a lot of interesting visitors coming in who I meet with, not just from Israel, but from the Arab world at large. And all of that is reflected in that fabulous column I write every Tuesday. And can I tell you?
Two questions. One is, when I speak to Muslims and Arabs, the story that I usually get from them is actually another mention that the Jews were never in the Middle East whatsoever. Yeah. All the Jews were somewhere in Ukraine. And then at some point, they all decided to go to Israel, but they're all related to Khazars. There's always like some story about how the ancient Jews disappeared and now it's modern. And the more I talk to Muslims, the more I realize this narrative is in the Muslim world. So the first question is this a story that you've heard of, or a narrative that you've heard, and how would you respond to it? And
okay, so yeah, I mean, look, the concept of the Khazars came from Arthur Kessler, who otherwise was an interesting guy, but it's a crackpot theory. And now you have this book, Shlomo Sand, The Invention of the Jewish People, which is the same kind of deal. Yasser Arafat, there's one of the things that, first of all, this belief is pervasive. And in fact, Yasser Arafat once told Bill Clinton, I have to tell you, I don't think the Jews were ever in Palestine. And you know what Bill Clinton said? So who exactly was Jesus? Says, undying credit. That was Bill's response. There is this narrative, but the deeper point actually about that narrative is a fundamental problem, which is what you might call the closing of the Muslim mind. After the suicide bombing of the Coptic church in Alexandria, the narrative in the Egyptian press across the board, not just the Muslim Brotherhood, but secular, so-called liberal writers, even Coptic Christian writers, was that this was a Zionist plot. And there were two competing theories. One was that the Mossad directly had bombed the church. And the second was that Al-Qaeda was operationally under the control of the Mossad. And the Mossad had sent Al-Qaeda to do this and therefore divide Egyptians and crack national unity, et cetera, et cetera. This is very worrying because you have, when you sort of listen to the debates in the Muslim world, it's like both sides are cracked. You talk to people who describe themselves as liberals, and everything for them is this fanatical, bizarre, anti-Semitic conspiracy. They're deeply steeped into this, which is one of the reasons why I'm very skeptical about the uprisings, the future of the uprisings in the Arab world, because if you have a political dialectic in which neither side has any kind of sensible analysis of what's wrong in their societies, you're not going to get productive political outcomes. In the United States, you have Democrats, you've got Republicans. wherever you stand, they both are sort of approaching things from more or less the standpoint of planet Earth. But that's not true in the Arab world. And so this notion of Jews having no connection to the land, of having just sort of gotten off the boat from the Crimea or whatever, and taking the land has become absolutely pervasive. I can give you a million examples of that, but you can't deal with that narrative. You can't deal with people who are simply not operating in any kind of rational framework. David Brooks, whom I hate to quote, once made a point, I forgot what the context was, but he said, it's not that simply that the Muslim world and the West that they have different ideas. It's they have different ideas about ideas. And that's actually a very profound, no, actually it's a jejune and second-rate analysis, but David made it, and I thought I'd give him some credit. But that kind of gets to the heart of it. And by the way, one thing that's important is there are limits to, persuasion has its limits. There are people you can talk to. When I write my column, my wife is basically liberal. And I always try to write my column and think, I want to write a column which she's not necessarily going to agree with, but at least she'll say, okay, I can see that. That's the way, I don't want to preach to the converted. I want to write a column that's sort of reaching a little bit over to the other side and doing the best I can to at least stop and make them think. And I think I more or less succeed, in that. But there are people who you're never going to persuade. There are people in the BDS campaign who you will never win over because they're too invested or they're too stupid or one thing or another. And that has to be borne in mind, when you fight these battles. You're not going to win every single one of them. You're not going to win. All you want to do is win 51%. Or, in George Bush's case, 47%.
So while you're arguing with some of these people that are somewhat more against Israel, do they ever give you good arguments, in fact, against Israel? What would be an example of something that they're saying that is true and it's hard to argue against that Israel has done somewhat wrong?
Well, there are lots of cases that you can make. And the best cases actually come from, Israelis themselves, because there is a vibrant debate in Israel about, the fashlas, the screw-ups that Israel makes repeatedly. I, for instance, was a supporter of disengagement from Gaza. I thought it was a really good idea. Now I'm not so sure. Alternatively, I used to just sort of be opposed ideologically to an idea of a two-state solution. Now I'm pretty much in favor of it, with the caveat that I want something that works in practice, not just in theory. Now, as for Israel's die-hard opponents, no, I think they're completely insane. I concede nothing to them. There is, look, Israel's a democracy, and within any democracy, you have to take it as a given that there will be contending sides and disputes about what's wise and right. But, whatever debates that I'm having with, my friends who are either further to the left or further to the right of me, it's in the context of accepting that this is, a legitimate state that is basically a good place. It's not in the context of having a debate with someone who says everything that Israel does is a crime, or that it's based on a crime, or anything of the kind. I can't have those. That's a different
level of conversation.
There is no conversation, or it's a different level. Yeah, it's a different level of conversation. Look, what am I supposed to concede? It's not a matter of pride. But even if I wanted to, even if I strained and said, okay, well, Israel was really, wrong in 48 or 73 or 56, I can't see it. That's not to say Israel's a perfect state, but I can't see it.
I think that with the recent events in Tunisia and Egypt, that there's a risk that the American public will become more pro-Arab?
Look, the American public has been consistently pro-Israel since the very beginning. And Oren's third book, was it second or third book, Faith, Fantasy, and Power, really was excellent in explaining, in sort of tracing the history of philo-Semitism in the United States. The Pilgrims saw themselves very much as like the new Hebrews. And the Puritan religiosity was obsessed with the Old Testament in the way that, say, Catholic religiosity was just more or less indifferent to the Old Testament. It's why you have New Canaan and Salem and all these places. So, I mean, the first part of the answer to your question is and something a lot of Jews don't understand is the depth of philo-Semitic feeling in this country, which is not just a function of Israel being a democracy, or it has to do with a religious perspective, which is quite powerful. James Madison had to failed out of his Hebrew classes at Princeton, and had to, I think, take another year at Princeton to qualify in Hebrew. So people forget. Just any of you go to Yale? Have you seen the inscription of the college? Now, would people become less pro-Israel if Tunisia, Egypt democratized? I don't think so. I think they just become more pro-Egypt and pro-Tunisia. I mean, people aren't sort of less pro-Canada because there's, Britain is a democracy or Australia is a democracy. Your sympathies just sort of rise in tandem with the quality of the state. Now, Israel might become less, or Americans might become less pro-Israel if, say, the Palestinians were suddenly to become a genuine progressive democracy, genuinely committed to peace and all the rest of it, and Israelis were to respond to that new reality by saying, screw you, we're going to continue to stay in the West Bank forever. But Israel wouldn't do that because Israel would respond to genuine Palestinian progressivism by, commensurately, by recognizing that this is a nation that we can live alongside. So no, I don't think that would be the result.
What do you think the effects of the rise of the politically conservative student movement, whether it's the growing contingent of young adults and students at CPAC, or the rise of alternative conservative papers on campus, or the rise of Young America's Foundation, will have an impact on the sort of environment on campus?
I don't know. Like, the idea of being like a young college Republican is just so deeply terrifying. Like, what went wrong in your life that this is what you're doing as a 19-year-old? I honestly don't know how to answer that because I follow that, like, not at all. I was just politically completely indifferent in college. But look, from the little I observed, you always get like on any campus, you're 100 or so young Republicans, and then you're X number of like trendy leftists, and then everyone else just doesn't really give a damn, which is one of the glories of the American educational system. So I don't see it having that much of an effect. That being said, let me make a sort of tangential point, which it might be relevant. The Jewish world, the organized Jewish world, basically has two sides. One is the world that is sort of about Jewishness, like birthright. It's like discovering an aspect of your Jewish identity. It's positive. It's, or federation, like being charitable giving in the Jewish world, or Aish, or, all this stuff, whatever it is, it's about that. There's one side. And then the other side is essentially the Jewish world fighting against anti-Semitism. So that's, or making the case for Israel and fighting its enemies. So that's like ADL and Camera and the Israel Project and the David Project and the, I don't know, whoever else project. Every rich Jewish donor who, just wants to fund a cause that's standing up to anti-Semitism. All that is great. It's important. It's necessary. But there is not a lot in the organized Jewish world which is